The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Monticello General Store, and Penelope Rivers stepped down into the dust, with her leather satchel clutched tight against her chest, feeling the weight of seed packets pressing against her ribs through the fabric. She wore a simple gray traveling dress that had seen better days, and when she brushed her hands against her skirt, dried dirt scattered into the Utah wind like memories she could not shake. The year was 1884, and this barren corner of southeastern Utah looked like the end of the world. All red rock and scrub brush beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She had come from Missouri with nothing but those seeds, $23 sewn into her hem, and a desperate need to disappear from a life that had crumbled like old bread. Her father had gambled away their farm, then drunk himself to death before the bank could take everything. Her mother had followed him into the ground 6 months later, her heart simply giving up. Penelope had no siblings, no suitors who wanted a penniless woman with dirt perpetually under her fingernails, and no prospects beyond the advertisement she had answered in the Kansas City paper. A man seeking a wife in the Utah Territory, someone willing to work hard, someone not afraid of isolation. The general store smelled of tobacco and leather, and the man behind the counter looked her up and down with watery eyes that held no warmth. "You the mail-order bride," she lifted her chin. "I am Penelope Rivers. I am here to meet Lucas Crawford." The shopkeeper jerked his thumb toward the window. That would be him, leaning against the post. Through the dusty glass, she saw a tall man in worn denim and a battered hat, his face shadowed but his posture suggesting someone who had been waiting a long time and had learned not to expect much. Penelope gathered her courage, picked up her bag, and walked outside into the afternoon heat. Lucas Crawford straightened when he saw her, and she got her first good look at the man she had agreed to marry. He was perhaps 27 or 28, lean and sun-darkened, with pale blue eyes that seemed startling against his tanned skin. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, and his hands, she noticed, were calloused and scarred from hard work. He was not handsome in any conventional sense, but there was something steady in the way he looked at her, something that made her think he might be a man who kept his word. "Miss Rivers." His voice was low and rough, like he did not use it often. "I am Lucas Crawford. Welcome to Monticello," she nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look after 3 weeks of travel, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins, her dress wrinkled and stained. "Thank you for meeting me." He picked up her bag without asking, testing its weight with a slight frown. "This all you brought? I do not need much." She felt defensive about her meager belongings, but he did not seem to be judging, just curious. "I have what matters. The letter said you knew about farming." "I grew up on a farm. I know soil and seasons. I know what will grow and what will not." She met his eyes directly. "I know how to work." Something shifted in his expression, a softening she had not expected. "That is good. You will need to know that out here." He gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 tired-looking horses. "The ranch is about 8 miles out. We should get going before it gets too late." She climbed onto the wagon seat, and he settled beside her, taking up the reins with hands that moved with practiced ease. As they rolled out of town, she studied the landscape with a farmer's eye. The earth was red and sandy, dotted with sage and juniper, and the mountains in the distance were bare and austere. It was beautiful in a harsh way, but she could not see anything green, anything growing that spoke of cultivation or care. "What do you raise?" she asked. "Cattle, horses." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was chewing on words he did not want to say. "I have got 20 head of cattle, some chickens, 2 milk cows. The land is not much for grazing. Previous owner went bust trying to make it work." "How much land?" 320 acres. He said it without pride, just stating a fact. Most of it is not worth much. Rocky, dry. The creek runs year-round, but it is small. I manage to keep the animals watered, but that is about it." Penelope felt something sink in her chest. She had known this would not be easy, but she had hoped for soil, for earth that could be coaxed into giving something back. "You said in your letter you wanted someone who could help build something." "I did." He glanced at her sideways, and she saw something vulnerable in his face, quickly hidden. "I have been out here 3 years trying to make this work. I can keep myself and the animals alive, but I cannot seem to do more than that. I thought maybe someone with farming knowledge could see something I am missing." The honesty in his words touched her more than flattery would have. This was not a man trying to trick her or oversell his situation. He was laying out the truth, bare and difficult as it was. "I will do what I can," she said quietly. "That is all I can promise. That is more than I had yesterday." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking and the horses plodding steadily through the red dust. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon, painting the rocks in shades of orange and crimson. Penelope noticed details as they went. The hardy plants that managed to survive in this unforgiving place, the way water had carved channels through the stone, the birds that nested in the juniper trees. Life found a way even here. Perhaps she could too. "Why did you come?" Lucas asked suddenly. "A woman like you could have found something better than this." She almost laughed at that, but it would have been bitter. "A woman like me, you do not know anything about me. I know you are educated. Your letters were well written. I know you are young, not more than 21 or 22. You could have found work in a city, maybe as a teacher or a seamstress." "I am 23, she said, "and I did not want a city, I wanted land. I wanted to grow things." She paused, deciding how much to tell him. "My family lost everything. I had nothing left there but debts and memories. Your advertisement offered a fresh start. I took it." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I will not pry more than that. And you?" she asked. "Why are you out here alone, advertising for a wife instead of courting someone in town?" His mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. "Same reason as you, I expect. Nothing left where I came from. I worked cattle drives for 5 years, saved every penny, bought this land from a man who was happy to be rid of it. I thought I could build something, prove I was more than just a drifter. But it is hard to do alone, and the women in Monticello are not interested in a man with a failing ranch and no family connections." The sun touched the horizon as the ranch came into view, and Penelope felt her heart sink further. The house was small, barely more than a cabin, with a sagging porch and a roof that looked like it leaked. The barn was in better shape, probably because Lucas spent his energy on keeping the animals sheltered. A windmill creaked in the breeze, pumping water into a trough where the cattle gathered. Beyond that, she saw nothing but red earth and rock, acre after acre of barren land that looked like it had never known a plow. Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop and helped her down, his hand warm and rough against hers. "It is not much," he said, and she heard the defensiveness in his voice, the shame. "It is honest," she replied, and meant it. "Show me the water." He looked surprised but led her past the house to where a narrow creek wound through a shallow canyon. The water was clear and cold when she knelt to touch it, and she studied the banks, noting the soil composition, the plants that grew close to the moisture. There was potential here if she could figure out how to use it. "The land is alkaline," she said, more to herself than to him. "Too much salt for most crops, but there are things that will grow in this soil. I have got seeds for plants that thrive in difficult conditions." Lucas crouched beside her, watching her face instead of the water. "You really think you can make something grow here?" "I have to," she said simply. "Otherwise, what is the point of any of this?" He stood and offered his hand to help her up. "Come on, I will show you the house. It is not fancy, but it is solid. I built it myself." The interior was sparse but clean. One main room with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner. A second, smaller room held supplies and tools. Lucas set her bag down and looked uncomfortable, like he was unsure what to do with a woman in his space. "I will sleep in the barn," he said abruptly. "Until we are married proper. The preacher comes through town once a month. He will be back in 2 weeks. Penelope felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, that is kind." "It is decent," he corrected. "You came all this way on my word. Least I can do is give you time to decide if you want to go through with this." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who had been knocked down by life but was still trying to stand up straight. A man who did not make promises he could not keep. A man who treated a near stranger with more respect than most of the men she had known back home. "I will go through with it," she said. "I did not come here to change my mind." Something flickered across his face, relief maybe, or hope. "All right then, I will let you settle in. There is a pump outside for water, and I stocked the pantry yesterday. I will be in the barn if you need anything." After he left, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the weight of what she had done. She was alone in the middle of the Utah Territory with a man she had just met, committed to marrying him in 2 weeks, standing on land that looked like it could not support a cactus, let alone a farm. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something strange and unfamiliar, possibility. She unpacked her bag slowly, laying out her few possessions with care. 3 dresses, undergarments, a shawl her mother had knitted, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day, and the seeds. She had more than 20 varieties, carefully saved and labeled. Squash that could tolerate drought, beans that fixed nitrogen in poor soil, sunflowers that grew tall even in adversity, melons that needed heat and little else. She had herbs for medicine and flavor, flowers that attracted pollinators, grains that could survive harsh conditions. Each packet represented research and planning. Hours spent in the library reading agricultural journals, talking to farmers at markets, learning everything she could about growing food in difficult environments. If Lucas Crawford had given her barren land, she would find a way to make it bloom. The next morning, she woke before dawn to the sound of a rooster crowing. She dressed quickly in her oldest dress, tied her hair back with a piece of string, and went outside to find Lucas already working, feeding the chickens and milking the cows. He looked up when he heard her approach, surprise clear on his face. "You are up early." "Farm habits," she said. "Put me to work." He handed her a pail of milk without argument, and she carried it inside, straining it through cheesecloth the way her mother had taught her. When she came back out, he was saddling a horse, preparing to ride out to check on the cattle scattered across his property. "I want to walk the land," she told him. "See what we are working with. It is rough terrain, easy to get turned around. Then show me the boundaries before you go. I will stay within them." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. They walked together to a rise that overlooked the property, and he pointed out landmarks. The twisted juniper that marked the north corner, the red rock formation to the south, the line of the creek running east to west. She memorized it all, her mind already cataloging potential growing sites, places where water might collect, areas sheltered from the worst of the sun. "Be careful," he said before he left. "There are rattlesnakes, and if a storm comes up, get back to the house. The weather here can turn mean fast." She spent the morning exploring, her boots kicking up red dust, her hands touching soil and rock and plant. The land was harsh, no question about it. The topsoil was thin where it existed at all, and much of the ground was simply exposed bedrock or sand. But near the creek, there were pockets of better earth, places where floods had deposited silt over the years. Those places would be her starting points. By noon, she had mapped out 3 potential garden sites in her mind. She returned to the house, drank deeply from the pump, and started looking through Lucas's tools. She found a shovel, a hoe, a pickaxe, all well used but maintained. She would need more eventually, but she could start with these. When Lucas returned that evening, dusty and tired, he found her digging a trench near the creek, her dress soaked with sweat, her hands blistered. He dismounted quickly and strode over, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "What are you doing?" She leaned on her shovel, breathing hard. "Irrigation. If I can channel some of the creek water to those flat areas, I can create garden beds. The water will seep through the soil slowly, giving the plants what they need without flooding them." He looked at the trench, then at her, then back at the trench. "You are going to dig ditches?" "Yes, unless you have a better idea for getting water to where I need it." "I've got a better idea for who should be doing the digging." He took the shovel from her hands despite her protest. "Show me where you want these trenches. I will dig them. You have your own work to do. And you are part of that work now. Show me." They worked together until dark, Lucas digging while Penelope directed, explaining her vision for how the water would flow, where the gardens would go, what she planned to plant. He listened without interrupting, asked smart questions about drainage and soil amendments, and worked with the steady determination of a man who had learned to endure. By the time they stopped, they had completed 1 full irrigation channel, and Penelope could already imagine water flowing through it, bringing life to the red earth. Over dinner, simple beans and cornbread that she had made while he finished the evening chores, Lucas said, "You know your business. I will give you that. My father used to say I was born with dirt under my fingernails. I was walking the fields with him before I could barely walk at all. He taught you well." She felt the familiar ache of loss but pushed it aside. "He taught me what mattered. How to read the land, how to work with what you have instead of wishing for what you do not. He just could not teach himself the same lessons when it came to cards and whiskey." Lucas nodded slowly. "My father was a drunk too, mean one. I left home at 15 and never looked back." "Is he still alive?" "I do not know. I do not care to know." He met her eyes across the table. "Some people cannot be saved no matter how much you love them. I figured that out early. Sounds like you did too." It was the most personal conversation they had had, and Penelope felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared wounds. They were both orphans in their own way, both survivors, both trying to build something new from the wreckage of the past. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Lucas worked the ranch, tending his cattle and maintaining the property, while Penelope focused on preparing the land for planting. He helped her dig more irrigation channels, hauled rocks to build up the borders of garden beds, and even rode into town to buy chicken wire and posts, so she could fence off her growing areas from the animals. They worked side by side in the long summer evenings, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to talk. She learned that he had been born in Texas, that he had worked cattle drives from the time he was a boy, that he had seen most of the West from the back of a horse. He had saved his money with a single-minded determination to own something that could not be taken away from him, to build a life that was his own. The ranch was not much, but it was his, and that mattered more than comfort or ease. He learned that she had practically run her family's farm for the last 3 years of her father's life, that she had kept them fed even as everything else fell apart, that she had a mind for plants and growing things that bordered on instinctive. She could look at soil and know what it needed, could sense when rain was coming by the smell of the air, could coax green shoots from earth that looked dead. On the day before the preacher was due to arrive, Penelope planted her first seeds. She had chosen carefully. Beans and squash that could handle the heat, herbs that thrived in poor soil, sunflowers to break up the hard earth with their deep roots. She worked each seed into the ground with her fingers, whispering encouragements like prayers, and when she stood and looked at the bare earth that held so much potential, she felt Lucas watching her from the barn. He walked over slowly, his hat in his hands. Will they grow? Some will. Some will not. That is the nature of it. But enough will make it, and then we will have seeds from those plants, seeds that have adapted to this soil and this climate. Next year will be better. The year after that, better still. You think in years, he observed, not days or weeks. Plants teach you patience. They cannot be rushed. She looked at him, this man she was going to marry tomorrow, and felt a strange calm. Neither can trust, he nodded, understanding what she was not quite saying. I am glad you came, Penelope. However this works out, I am glad you came. So am I. The wedding was held in the small church in Monticello, with the shopkeeper and his wife serving as witnesses. Penelope wore her best dress, pale blue with buttons up the back, and Lucas wore clean clothes that looked stiff and uncomfortable on his lean frame. The preacher was an old man with kind eyes who kept the ceremony short and simple. When Lucas slipped a plain gold band on her finger, his hands were shaking slightly, and when she looked up at him, she saw nervous hope in his pale eyes. You may kiss your bride, the preacher said, and Lucas leaned down carefully, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was chaste and brief, but held a promise of something more. They were husband and wife now, bound by law and God, two strangers trying to build a life together on barren ground. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Lucas helped her down from the wagon and stood there awkwardly, clearly unsure of what came next. I moved my things back into the house, he said. But I can still sleep in the barn if you want more time. Penelope felt a rush of affection for this careful, considerate man. You are my husband now. You should sleep in your own bed. We will figure the rest out as we go. That night, they lay beside each other in the narrow bed, both fully clothed, both acutely aware of the other's presence. Lucas kept to his side, giving her space, and Penelope felt grateful and slightly disappointed all at once. She knew so little about the physical side of marriage, only whispered stories from married women and her mother's vague advice to endure it for the sake of children. But lying next to Lucas in the darkness, listening to his careful breathing, she found herself curious rather than afraid. Lucas. She whispered, Yeah, thank you for being patient with me. She felt him turn toward her, though she could not see his face in the dark. I do not want you to be afraid of me, Penelope. I do not want you to feel trapped. We have got time to learn each other. She reached out tentatively and found his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I am not afraid, just new to all of this. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her throat tight. Me too. I have never had anyone to be gentle with before. I am probably not very good at it. You are doing fine. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, and when Penelope woke in the morning to find Lucas already up and making coffee, she felt something warm and unfamiliar in her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the soil from which love might grow. The summer heat intensified as June turned to July, and Penelope watched her garden with the focused attention of a mother watching a newborn. The first shoots appeared within a week, pale green fingers pushing through the red earth, and she felt a fierce joy at the sight. Lucas came to look at them every morning, and she saw his expression shift from skepticism to wonder as the plants grew stronger. I did not think anything could grow here, he admitted one evening, standing at the edge of the garden. "I thought I had bought dead land." "No land is dead if it has water and sun," she said. "It just needs someone willing to work with it." He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, a softness that only appeared when he thought she was not watching. "You are something else, Penelope Rivers Crawford." The use of her new name sent a thrill through her. She was someone different now, someone who belonged to this place and this man. "We are partners," she said. "This is our land now, our work." As the plants grew, so did the ease between them. They fell into patterns of domestic life that felt almost natural. She cooked, he provided meat and milk, they ate together and talked about the day's work. At night, they lay in bed and shared stories from their pasts, slowly revealing themselves to each other in the safety of darkness. Lucas told her about the first time he had been thrown from a horse, about the cattle stampede that had nearly killed him, about the day he had signed the papers on the ranch, and felt terror and pride in equal measure. Penelope told him about her mother's garden, about the year the floods had come and destroyed everything, about the day she had buried her parents and realized she was completely alone. One night, nearly a month after their wedding, Lucas reached for her in the darkness, his hand finding her waist. "Penelope," he said quietly, "I would like to be your husband in full if you are willing." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she turned toward him, finding his face with her hands. "I am willing. Show me what to do." He was gentle and patient, even when she tensed with nervousness, even when she made small sounds of discomfort. He whispered reassurances, moved slowly, gave her time to adjust and accept. It was strange and awkward and brief, but when it was over and he held her close, stroking her hair and asking if she was all right, Penelope felt something crack open inside her. This man, this careful, lonely man, cared about her comfort more than his own pleasure. That meant something. That meant everything. "I am all right," she whispered against his chest. "Better than all right." She felt him smile against her hair. "It will get better, I promise." And it did. As the summer progressed, and they learned each other's bodies, the physical intimacy became something Penelope looked forward to, a closeness that deepened the growing affection between them. Lucas was an attentive lover, more concerned with her pleasure than his own, and Penelope discovered that her body was capable of sensations she had never imagined. In the darkness of their small house, they built a private world of touch and whispered endearments, and Penelope began to understand that what she felt for Lucas was shifting from partnership into something much deeper. By August, the garden was thriving beyond her most optimistic hopes. The beans climbed tall, heavy with pods. The squash spread their broad leaves across the red earth, and fat vegetables swelled beneath them. The sunflowers stood like sentinels, their faces tracking the sun across the sky. Penelope harvested constantly, preserving what they could not eat fresh, and Lucas built her shelves in the small storage room to hold the jars of vegetables and pickles that accumulated. One evening, he came back from town with a wagon load of supplies and a strange expression on his face. "The shopkeeper asked me what I had done different this year," he said. "Said he had never seen the creek flowing so strong in August. I told him my wife knew about irrigation." "What did he say?" "He said he had some friends who might want to talk to you about helping with their land." "I told him maybe next year, after we have got our own place sorted." He paused, looking almost shy. "I told him you were going to make this ranch into something special, and I did not want to share you yet." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "Lucas Crawford, was that your way of saying you want to keep me to yourself, maybe?" He pulled her close, his hands settling on her waist in a way that had become familiar and welcome. "Is that so wrong? Not even a little bit." She kissed him, standing on her toes to reach his mouth, and felt his smile against her lips. As fall approached, Penelope began to plan for the next year. She saved seeds from the strongest plants, made notes about what had worked and what had not, sketched out plans for expanding the garden and adding fruit trees near the creek. Lucas watched her work with something like awe, seeing her transform the place he had thought of as a failure into something with potential. "You have changed everything," he told her one night as they lay together after making love. "This place feels different now. It feels like a home." "It is our home," she said, tracing patterns on his bare chest. "We are building it together." He caught her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her fingertips. "I love you, Penelope. I did not expect to, but I do. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it." "Why afraid?" "Because loving someone means they can hurt you, and I have been hurt enough." He pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret loving me. That is a promise." In October, Penelope realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, then two, before she said anything to Lucas. When she finally told him over breakfast one morning, his face went through a series of expressions so fast she could barely track them. Shock, fear, wonder, joy. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be. I have never been late before." He stood up so fast his chair tipped over, then seemed unsure what to do with himself. Finally, he came around the table and knelt in front of her, pressing his face against her stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." She ran her fingers through his dark hair, feeling the enormity of it settle over her. "Are you happy?" He looked up at her with eyes that were suspiciously bright. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Terrified too, but happy most of all. The pregnancy progressed through the winter, and Lucas became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, did not want her out in the cold for too long, worried constantly about whether she was eating enough. Penelope bore his fussing with amused patience, knowing it came from love and fear in equal measure. This baby represented everything they were building together, a future that extended beyond just the two of them. When the first real snow came in December, blanketing the red earth in white, Penelope stood at the window and looked out at the transformed landscape. Lucas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her gently, his hands resting on the small swell of her belly. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I came here with nothing but seeds in my pocket and dirt on my hands. You gave me barren land, and I thought maybe that was all I deserved, all I could hope for. But we turned it into something beautiful. We made it bloom." "You made it bloom, I just helped." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "No, we did it together. That is what makes it matter." He kissed her softly, and she tasted snowflakes on his lips. The winter was hard, as winters in the Utah Territory always were, but they had prepared well. The root cellar was full of preserved vegetables from the garden. They had smoked meat and stored grain, and Lucas had made sure the animals had enough fodder to last until spring. They spent the long, dark evenings by the fire, making plans for the coming year, talking about the baby, dreaming about the future. In March, when the snow was melting and the first hints of spring were appearing, Penelope went into labor. Lucas rode hard to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Hendricks, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lucas, pacing outside the bedroom door, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But when he finally heard the baby's first cry, strong and indignant, he sank to his knees in relief. Mrs. Hendricks opened the door with a smile. "You have got a son, Mr. Crawford. A big, healthy boy. And your wife did just fine, though she is tired. Lucas entered the room on shaking legs and found Penelope propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced infant wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "We have a son," she whispered. "Lucas, we have a son." He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the tiny, perfect face of his child, feeling something enormous and overwhelming crash over him. This was his son, his family, his whole world contained in this small room. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. Lucas thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the barren land that had bloomed, about the future spreading out before them. "James," he said. "James Matthew Crawford, after my grandfather, the only family member who was ever kind to me." "James Matthew Crawford," Penelope repeated, looking down at the baby. "That is perfect." Little James was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Penelope for feeding, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, staring at him for hours as if he could not quite believe the child was real. Penelope watched her husband transform into a father and felt her love for him deepen into something unshakable. When spring fully arrived, and Penelope was recovered enough to work outside again, she found that the garden beds had survived the winter better than expected. The irrigation channels had protected the soil from erosion, and some of the perennial herbs had come back strong. She planted again, this time with James sleeping in a basket beside the garden, and she felt the rightness of it, the perfect symmetry of new life in the earth and in her arms. Lucas had been working on expanding the ranch, slowly building up the cattle herd, improving the barn and making repairs to the house. The ranch was not prosperous yet, but it was stable, growing, becoming something that might actually succeed. Other ranchers in the area had started asking him for advice, noticing how his land seemed to produce more than theirs, how his cattle looked healthier. Lucas always credited Penelope, telling them about her irrigation systems and her knowledge of plants, and soon she had a reputation in Monticello as the woman who could make anything grow. By the time James was 6 months old, 2 neighboring ranchers had approached them about helping design similar garden systems on their land. Penelope was hesitant at first, not wanting to take time away from her own family, but Lucas encouraged her. "You have got knowledge that could help people," he said, "and we could use the extra money to keep expanding. I will watch James while you work. We will make it happen together." So Penelope began consulting with other farmers and ranchers, teaching them about irrigation, soil amendments, and crop selection for the difficult Utah climate. She charged fair prices and earned a reputation for honesty and expertise. The money she brought in allowed them to buy more cattle, build a proper chicken coop, and start construction on an addition to the house. The years passed in a rhythm of planting and harvest, of growth and building. When James was 2, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, a tiny, delicate baby with dark hair and her father's solemn expression. Lucas doted on his daughter even more than he had his son, and Penelope teased him about being wrapped around such tiny fingers. "I never knew I could feel like this," he told her one night, watching Sarah sleep in her cradle. "Like my heart is too big for my chest, like I would do anything, give anything, just to keep them safe and happy." "That is what it means to love someone," Penelope said softly. "To give yourself over to it completely, even knowing they could break your heart." He looked at her with such intensity that she caught her breath. "You gave yourself over to me when you stepped off that stage with seeds in your pocket. You trusted me with your life, your future, everything." "I will never stop being grateful for that, Penelope. I will never stop trying to deserve it." She went to him, leaving her mending on the chair, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You deserve it, Lucas. You are a good man, a good husband, a good father. You are everything I hoped for and more than I dreamed." Their life was not without hardships. There were dry years when the creek ran low, and they had to work twice as hard to keep the gardens alive. There was the year a late freeze killed half their crops, and they had to stretch their preserved food to make it through. There was the time James broke his arm falling from a horse, and Penelope sat up all night with him, praying the bone would set properly. There was the year cattle prices dropped, and they had to sell off part of the herd they had worked so hard to build. But they faced everything together, Lucas and Penelope, partners in every sense of the word. They had learned to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, to work as a single unit toward their shared goals. The ranch prospered because of their combined efforts, because Lucas's practical knowledge of ranching merged seamlessly with Penelope's understanding of agriculture and sustainability. By the time James was 10 and Sarah was 8, the Crawford Ranch was one of the most successful small operations in southeastern Utah. They had expanded to 500 acres, had a herd of nearly 100 cattle, and Penelope's gardens had become famous throughout the territory. People came from as far as Salt Lake City to learn her methods, to buy her seeds, to see the miracle of green growing from red earth. Lucas had built Penelope a proper greenhouse near the creek, a beautiful structure with glass windows he had ordered from Denver. In it, she started seedlings for sale, experimented with new varieties, and kept a small paradise of growing things even in the depths of winter. It was her sanctuary, and Lucas made sure she had time to retreat there when she needed peace. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching James and Sarah play in the yard, Lucas took Penelope's hand. They were in their early 30s now, both weathered by sun and work, both carrying the marks of their hard-won success. But when he looked at her, Penelope could still see the young man who had met her at the general store, nervous and hopeful and determined. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Answering my advertisement, coming to this God-forsaken corner of Utah?" Penelope laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "God-forsaken? Look around you, Lucas. This place is blessed. We made it so. You made it so. I just gave you dirt and desperation. You gave me a chance. You gave me partnership and respect and love. You gave me a family." She squeezed his hand. "I came here with nothing, ready to settle for survival. You gave me a life worth living." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles in the gesture that had become his signature sign of affection. "You turned barren land into a garden. You turned a lonely cowboy into a husband and father. If anyone worked miracles here, it was you. We worked them together." Sarah came running up to the porch, her braids flying behind her. "Mama, Papa, look what I found." She held out a fistful of wildflowers, tiny purple blooms that grew in the spaces between the cultivated gardens. Penelope took them carefully, admiring each small flower. "These are beautiful, sweetheart. What are they called?" "I do not know, but they are pretty and they grow here, so they must be strong." Lucas met Penelope's eyes over their daughter's head, and they shared a smile of perfect understanding. Strong and beautiful, growing in impossible places. That was their family, their legacy. As the sun set over the red rocks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Penelope thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived in Monticello with $23, a satchel full of seeds, and dirt permanently embedded under her fingernails. She had been broken by loss, desperate for a fresh start, willing to gamble everything on a stranger's promise of land and partnership. Lucas had given her barren land, yes, but he had also given her himself. His trust, his respect, his growing affection that had deepened into profound love. Together, they had taken that barren land and transformed it into something abundant and beautiful. They had built a home, raised children, created a legacy that would outlast them both. When James was 15, tall and strong and looking more like his father every day, he came to them with an announcement. "I want to study agriculture at the university in Salt Lake City. I want to learn everything Mama knows and more, so I can come back and help run this place properly." Penelope felt pride and sadness war in her chest. Her son was growing up, growing beyond the ranch, but growing toward a future that would bring him back. "You have my blessing," she said. "Both of you." She looked at Lucas, who nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You have got the land in your blood," Lucas said to his son. "Same as your mother. Go learn, then come back and teach us what you have discovered." Sarah, not to be outdone, announced at 13 that she wanted to learn about business and accounting, so she could help manage the ranch's finances and maybe even start a seed company based on her mother's cultivated varieties. Lucas and Penelope could do nothing but support their children's ambitions, marveling at how these two young people had absorbed the best of both their parents. The years continued their steady march. James went away to university and came back with a degree in agricultural science, and a quiet, smart young woman named Elizabeth whom he wanted to marry. Sarah proved to have a head for numbers and business that neither of her parents possessed, and by the time she was 20, she had established Crawford Seeds as a legitimate business, selling Penelope's carefully cultivated varieties throughout the Western Territories. Lucas and Penelope grew older together, their love deepening with every shared sunrise, every season planted and harvested, every challenge faced and overcome. Lucas's hair turned gray at the temples, and Penelope's hands grew gnarled from years of digging in the earth. But when they looked at each other, they saw past the physical changes to the people they had become together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Penelope by taking her back to Monticello, to the spot where he had first met her stepping off the stagecoach. They stood there together, hand in hand, and he said, "I was so scared that day. Scared you would take one look at me and get back on that stage. Scared I had lied to you about what I could offer. Scared I would disappoint you." "I was scared too," Penelope admitted. "Scared I had made a terrible mistake. Scared the land would defeat me. Scared I would end up alone again." "We were both fools." Lucas pulled her close, right there on the main street of Monticello, not caring who saw. "The only thing to be scared of was missing out on this, on us, on everything we built together." They kissed, these two middle-aged people who had found each other in desperation and forged a love that could weather anything, and passing townspeople smiled at the sight of the Crawfords, the couple who had turned barren land into one of the most productive ranches in Utah. When James and Elizabeth had their first child, a boy they named Lucas after his grandfather, Penelope held the infant and felt the circle of life complete itself. She had come to this land with seeds in her pocket, and those seeds had grown into gardens that fed her family and their community. She had married a man she barely knew, and that man had become the love of her life, her partner, her best friend. She had turned barren land into abundance, and in doing so had transformed herself from a grieving, desperate woman into someone strong and purposeful. Lucas watched her with their grandson, and his face held an expression of such deep contentment that it made Penelope's throat tight with emotion. This man who had advertised for a wife out of loneliness and desperation had become a husband, a father, a grandfather, the patriarch of a family that was growing and thriving. He had given her barren land, and together they had made it bloom. The ranch continued to prosper. Sarah's seed business grew so successful that she opened a shop in Monticello and hired 3 employees to help with the demand. James implemented new agricultural techniques he had learned at university, increasing crop yields and introducing sustainable practices that other ranchers began to adopt. The Crawford Ranch became a model for how to work with the harsh Utah landscape instead of fighting against it. Lucas, now in his 50s, spent less time doing the hard physical labor and more time managing the business side of the operation. He had become a respected voice in the community, serving on the town council and advocating for better irrigation systems and agricultural education. But his favorite times were still the evenings on the porch with Penelope, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. One such evening, when they were both 55 years old and had been married for 32 years, Penelope said, "I want to write it all down. Everything we did here, how we transformed this land. I want to leave instructions for the grandchildren, so they will know how to continue what we started." "That is a good idea. You should do it. Will you help me? I do not know if I can find the words for all of it by myself." Lucas smiled and took her hand. "We will do it the way we do everything else, together." They spent the next year working on what they called the Crawford Guide to High Desert Agriculture. Penelope wrote about soil composition, irrigation techniques, crop selection, and seed saving. Lucas added sections on sustainable ranching, water management, and adapting to climate variations. Together, they created a comprehensive manual that documented everything they had learned in 3 decades of working the land. When they finally completed it, they had copies made and distributed them to their children, grandchildren, and interested farmers throughout the territory. The guide became something of a legend in Utah agricultural circles, a practical and heartfelt testament to what could be accomplished with knowledge, determination, and love. Sarah took one of the copies and had a special edition made for her parents, bound in leather with their names engraved on the cover. She presented it to them on their 35th anniversary, and Penelope cried when she saw it, this physical representation of their life's work. "You two changed everything," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for our family, but for everyone in this region. You showed people what was possible." "We just worked hard," Lucas said, always uncomfortable with praise. "No, Papa, you did more than that. You loved each other, you loved this land, and you never gave up. That is worth more than all the agricultural techniques in the world." As they entered their 60s, Lucas and Penelope began to slow down, letting James and Elizabeth take over more of the daily operations of the ranch. They spent their time in Penelope's greenhouse, experimenting with new plant varieties, and on the porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played decades before. Little Lucas was joined by 3 more grandchildren. James and Elizabeth had 2 daughters, and Sarah married a banker from Monticello and had a son. The Crawford family grew and thrived, rooted deeply in the land that Penelope and Lucas had claimed and cultivated. One spring morning, when Penelope was 63, she woke early and went out to the garden. The sunrise painted the red rocks in shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled of sage and possibility. She knelt in the earth, her old hands sinking into the soil that she had spent decades improving, and she felt profound gratitude wash over her. She had arrived in Monticello with nothing but seeds in her pocket and dirt on her hands. She had been given barren land by a lonely cowboy who needed help as much as she did. Together, they had created a miracle. They had made the desert bloom, raised a family, built a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. Lucas found her there, kneeling in the garden, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Penelope, what is wrong?" He knelt beside her, his joints protesting but his concern overriding any physical discomfort. She turned to him, smiling through her tears. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I was just thinking about the day I arrived here, how lost I felt, how uncertain, and now look at all of this." She gestured at the thriving gardens, the prosperous ranch buildings, the house full of family. "We did this, Lucas. We made something beautiful from nothing." He pulled her close, holding her the way he had 1,000 times before, and she felt his heart beating steady and strong against her cheek. "You made it beautiful, my love. I just gave you the dirt to work with. No, we made it together. That is what made it possible. That is what made it matter." They sat together in the garden as the sun rose higher. Two old people who had loved each other through 3.5 decades of hardship and triumph, loss and gain, despair and hope. The land around them testified to their partnership. Every green shoot and thriving plant, a monument to what could be achieved when two people worked together toward a common purpose. In the years that followed, Lucas and Penelope became the beloved elders of the family, the wise grandparents who had stories of the old days, advice for every problem, and unconditional love for every member of their growing clan. They watched their grandchildren grow up, helped teach the youngest ones about planting and harvesting, shared their knowledge freely with anyone who asked. When Lucas was 70 and Penelope 68, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together nearly 50 family members. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out into the yard. And as Lucas looked around at all the life that had sprung from his union with Penelope, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the house that had grown from a tiny cabin into a proper homestead, Lucas took Penelope's hand and led her outside. The stars were brilliant in the clear Utah sky, and the air smelled of summer and growing things. "Do you remember the first night we spent in this house?" he asked. "How awkward we were, how unsure." Penelope laughed softly. "I remember thinking I had made the biggest mistake of my life, agreeing to marry a stranger and move to the middle of nowhere. And now I know it was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything, Lucas. A home, a family, a purpose, love beyond measure. You gave me a life I never dared dream of. I gave you barren land and a failing ranch. You gave me everything else." She turned to face him, this man she had loved for 45 years, and cupped his weathered face in her hands. "We gave each other a chance. That was all we needed. Everything else grew from that." He kissed her, soft and sweet, and she tasted the salt of his tears mixed with her own. They lived another decade together, growing older but never apart. Their love remained constant, a steady flame that had burned through every season of their lives. They watched their great-grandchildren take their first steps, helped James and Sarah navigate the challenges of running the ranch and the seed business, and spent long, peaceful hours in each other's company, needing no words to communicate the depth of their connection. When Lucas passed away in his sleep at the age of 81, with Penelope beside him holding his hand, she felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. But she also felt profound gratitude that they had been given so many years together, so much love, so much life. She buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land they had built together, and she planted a grove of aspens around his grave that would whisper in the wind for generations to come. Penelope lived another 5 years after Lucas's death, sustained by the love of her family and the work that had always given her purpose. She spent her final years in the greenhouse, developing new varieties of plants, writing additions to the agricultural guide, and sharing stories with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the early days of the ranch. When she finally passed away at 77, peacefully in her sleep just like Lucas, the family buried her beside her husband on the hill. And though they grieved, they also celebrated two lives that had been full and meaningful, two people who had loved each other deeply and built something that would last far beyond their own time on Earth. The Crawford Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, always using the principles that Penelope and Lucas had established. The gardens continued to bloom, even in the harsh Utah climate, a testament to Penelope's knowledge and dedication. The seed business grew into a regional company, bringing jobs and prosperity to Monticello. And every member of the Crawford family knew the story of how it all began, with a woman who arrived with seeds in her pocket and dirt on her hands, and a cowboy who gave her barren land. James, now in his 60s and the patriarch of the family, stood on the porch one evening with his own grandchildren and told them the story he had heard 100 times from his parents. "Your great-grandmother arrived in Monticello with nothing," he said. "She had lost everything and was starting over. Your great-grandfather was a lonely cowboy trying to make a failing ranch work. They were both desperate, both uncertain, both taking a chance on a future they could not predict. But they had courage and they had each other, and that was enough. They proved that barren land could bloom if you worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and never gave up. That is the legacy they left us. That is what it means to be a Crawford." The children listened with wide eyes, and James saw in their faces the same determination and love of the land that had driven his parents. The cycle would continue, generation after generation, all growing from the seeds Penelope had brought and the partnership she and Lucas had forged. Years turned into decades, and the Crawford story became legend in southeastern Utah. The ranch that had started as 320 acres of barren land grew to over 2,000 acres of productive property. Crawford Seeds became a national company, known for developing hardy plant varieties suited to difficult climates. And the agricultural guide that Penelope and Lucas had written together was republished and used in universities across the western states. But beyond the business success and the practical legacy, what endured was the love story. In a time and place where marriage was often a practical arrangement, where survival mattered more than affection, Penelope and Lucas had found something rare and precious. They had built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose, and that partnership had grown into a love that sustained them through nearly half a century of life together. Their descendants told and retold the story, each generation adding their own understanding and interpretation. But the core remained the same. A woman with seeds in her pocket and dirt on her hands had stepped off a stagecoach in Monticello, Utah in 1884. A cowboy with barren land and a desperate hope had given her a chance. Together, they had created abundance from scarcity, love from loneliness, legacy from desperation. The land they had claimed and cultivated continued to bloom, watered by the irrigation systems Penelope had designed and maintained by the principles she and Lucas had established. The family they had created continued to grow, strong and deeply rooted, like the aspens that whispered over their graves. And the love they had shared became a standard against which all other Crawford marriages were measured, a reminder that true partnership could transform not just individual lives, but the land itself. In the greenhouse that Lucas had built for Penelope, now a historic landmark maintained by the family, a plaque hung on the wall with words written by their daughter Sarah. She arrived with seeds in her pocket and dirt on her hands. He gave her barren land. Together they created a garden that bloomed for generations, This is the power of love and partnership, of determination and faith. This is the Crawford legacy. And every spring, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the gardens burst into life, the people of Monticello remembered Penelope and Lucas Crawford, the couple who had proven that even the most barren land could be transformed into paradise if tended with knowledge, patience, and love. Their story became part of the fabric of the community, a testament to what was possible when two people committed fully to each other and to a shared vision of the future. The Crawford Ranch stood as physical proof of their love, every acre improved by their labor, every building constructed with their careful planning, every plant descended from the seeds Penelope had brought in her pocket that long-ago day. It was a living monument to two people who had taken a chance on each other and built something that would outlast them both. And though Penelope and Lucas were gone, their presence could still be felt in the whisper of wind through the aspens, in the flow of water through irrigation channels, in the green shoots that pushed through red earth every spring. They had become part of the land itself, their love and labor woven into the very soil they had cultivated together. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had created everything that mattered: love, family, legacy, home. The barren land had bloomed, and it bloomed still, generation after generation. A garden that would never fade as long as there were Crawfords to tend it and remember the story of how it all began.